In the heart of a prosperous kingdom lay a grand palace, home to a king who was feared by all. He lived in opulence, surrounded by riches beyond imagination. While living in opulence, he watched while his people suffered under the weight of poverty and oppression. This king, whose name was whispered with dread, ruled with an iron fist, showing no mercy to those who dared to challenge his authority. The kings from other kingdoms declined from entering treaties with him because his notoriety was known far and near. He was brash, very loud, and boastful. His subjects were more of a means to an end in his kingdom. They worked while he plundered and squandered the resources meant for all the kingdoms. His citizens moaned in misery. The king had many beautiful wives. He treated them with disdain and cruelty. While he let them experience luxury, he never empowered them, and they were subservient to him. They would dress flamboyantly but never have any resources to spend or spare. He was rude and arrogant, with his temper flaring like a wildfire at the slightest inconvenience. His wives, while living in luxury, were prisoners in the palace, unable to alleviate the suffering of their people because the king's watchful eyes followed their every move. They never had resources to give their citizens. Food and shelter was a luxury. King Yuwaru, as he was known, inherited the kingdom from his mother. During her reign, the queen mother was benevolent, kind, and generous to her kingdom. She had raised her son with the same values, and all over the palace paintings of him veiled in humility with a promise of good governance was seen by all. But after he became king, King Yuwaru became a different person. His children feared him and only approached his presence when he requested for them. He was a mean and cruel king. Despite their own seeming lavish lifestyle, the wives snuck to have secret meetings with some of their citizens, listening to the grievances of their citizens and offering what little comfort they could. But their hands were tied by the king's tyranny, and their efforts seemed futile against an oppressive rule. King Yuwaru surrounded himself with chiefs of like minds. His chiefs would steal from the treasury and spend it on frivolous things while the citizens lived in hunger, deprivation, and crime. But nothing changed because there was no one to rise up to challenge the king. During the day, the citizens wished for night, and at night they wished for daylight. They lived in despair. Among the king's wives was one who held a special power. She was a Muja, gifted with abilities beyond mortal understanding. Despite the king's harsh treatment, she alone dared to speak to him, though her words were always met with disdain. One fateful day, driven to desperation by the suffering of her people, the Muja queen sought counsel with her fellow Mujas. She poured out her heart to the council of Mujas and reeled out all the king's atrocities. They listened with apt concentration and listened in horror at all the queen revealed. After listening to the queen's complaints, they devised a plan to teach the king a lesson he would never forget. With a fierce determination burning in their hearts, the Mujas prayed earnestly to their head Omoga, who resolved to transform the king into a goat for 1 year. They would tell the people the king had embarked on a journey, leaving his wives to govern the kingdom in his absence. One day the king walked round his palace, looking with pride at his kingdom and reeling out punishments to subjects who had committed crimes. He looked at all the beggars surrounding the palace with blatant disdain. The Muja queen invited him to her chamber. Reluctantly, the king found his way to see her after many hours of her waiting. As he entered, he roared at her, asking what she wanted, and right there King Yuwaru became a standing goat man. Muja queen alone had seen this transformation because she filled the atmosphere with a sleeping herb, and all his bodyguards and servants slept off before the transformation took place. He looked in horror, trying to express himself, but he could not, as he turned into a 4-footed goat and walked on his legs. Muja queen tied him to a tree and kept a Muja servant to watch over him till daybreak. In the morning, Goat King was left to wander around the kingdom to see his people. No provision was made for his feeding. As he wandered around the land, King Yuwaru witnessed firsthand the atrocities he had inflicted on his people. He saw their poverty, their fear, and their despair. Many times, the citizens, unaware of his true identity, attempted to slay him for food, the Muja servant walked close by to prevent harm from befalling him. Day and night the king laid on the dirty floor strapped to the tree. He had refused to make provision to clean the land. As the Muja queen ruled the kingdom with wisdom and compassion, all the chiefs were given different roles. They were to work closely with the citizens, listening to their complaints, and to return to the Muja queen with solutions to transform the land and its citizens. They were to devise a system of how the citizens would be able to have food distributed across the land. The once mighty king roamed the countryside in the form of a goat day in and day out. Every night, when the moon rose high in the sky, the queen would release him from his confinement, allowing him to wander among his subjects, unseen and unheard. She gave each family one goat and plenty of grain and ensured the king watched as the goats were killed and cooked. The goat king's existence became one of torment and anguish. Unable to communicate with those around him, he would only bleat and cry out in his frustration, his heart heavy with regret for the suffering he had caused. Yet his cry fell on deaf ears, for the people saw him only as a simple goat, oblivious to the turmoil raging within him. To the kingdom, the king had traveled and left the queens to rule. One day the queen devised a plan to further deepen the king's understanding of the consequences of his actions. She allowed him to be captured by travelers from the neighboring kingdom, who took him far away from his homeland. In this foreign land, the goat king witnessed scenes of suffering and cruelty that shook him to his core. He saw other animals being slaughtered and cooked, their flesh consumed by those who knew nothing of mercy or compassion. The king felt the terror of being hunted, the desperation of running for his life through unfamiliar terrain. In his moments of solitude and despair, the goat king reflected on his past deeds with a heavy heart. He longed for a chance to undo the harm he had caused, to make amends for his wickedness, but trapped in the body of a helpless creature, his cries for redemption went unanswered, lost amidst the vast wilderness. He looked and saw his people in their huts recovering from ailments, hunger and fear. One day, while wandering through the kingdom, he saw his daughters by the stream. They sat by the stream holding hands and talking. They looked happy and relieved to be able to see the other side of the kingdom and its beauty. They laughed as they listened to the streams and shared the shared joy of freedom. They observed the goats but dismissed any thought of it. He looked day after day as they would come sit and talk with their feet in the stream. They discussed how free and prosperous the land had become without their father. They talked about all the horrible things he did and wished him not to come back. He wept in his heart but could say nothing to them. He could only watch as they blossomed each day into beautiful young women. He cried in his heart, wishing he could have a chance to draw them close to ask for forgiveness for his brash behavior. And so, the once proud king learned the true meaning of suffering and humility, his heart forever scarred by the knowledge of his own wrongdoing. King Uweru refused to eat. He had to feed on leaves from trees, and this he found absurd. The Muja servant walked closely to monitor his progress but allowed him to experience all the frightful things. He would sometimes appear as a white goat or a black goat so no one would be suspicious of him. People chased after him, some threw stones at him, and in fear he ran like the goat he had become. On this fateful day the king was chosen among the animals rounded up to be slaughtered. The goat king panicked as he was carefully selected and cleaned, kept aside for the upcoming feast in the kingdom. He bleated desperately, trying to convey his fear and anguish to those around him, but his cries went unheard, lost amidst the clamor of the bustling market. As the traders prepared to slaughter him on the day of the feast, a sudden commotion broke out in the crowd. Pushing her way through the crowd, the Muja queen appeared, her eyes filled with determination as she inquired about the fattened goats to be slaughtered. When shown the goat king, she appealed for him to be spared. The traders resisted asking the queen why he would be spared among the other goats. She insisted and offered to pay a huge amount for the goat king to be sold to her. The traders looked in awe and wondered why the Muja queen was interested in a simple goat. She had hidden her identity, which caused the traders, oblivious to her true identity and intent, to dismiss her plea for the goat king's life. They scorned and ridiculed the Goat King while sharpening the knives for slaughter. They scoffed at her offer to pay a heavy price for the goat, refusing to listen to her desperate appeals. Undeterred, the Muja queen continued to plead with the traders, her voice trembling with emotion as she begged for mercy, but her words fell on deaf ears, as the traders remained unmoved by her entreaties. Time seemed to stand still as the tense standoff continued, the fate of the Goat King hanging in the balance. With each passing moment, the Muja queen's desperation grew. Her heart breaking at the thought of losing the chance to save him from a grisly fate. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, a sudden change came over the traders. With a begrudging nod, they accepted the Muja queen's offer, exchanging the Goat King for a hefty sum of gold and silver. Relief flooded through the Muja queen, as she cradled the Goat King in her arms, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. Together, they fled from the market, leaving behind the chaos and confusion of the crowd. As they disappeared into the night, the Muja queen vowed to protect the Goat King at all costs, determined to show him the kindness and compassion he has so sorely lacked in his former life. As they journeyed back to the kingdom, she prayed that he would one day find redemption for his past sins and emerge from the darkness a changed and humbled man. As the night of the king's return approached, anticipation hung heavy in the air. The Muja queen had convened a meeting with her fellow Mujas to discuss the fate of the once tyrannical ruler who had spent a year wandering as a goat. Amidst flickering candlelights, the Mujas deliberated, their voices resounded with laughter as they weighed the king's past transgressions against the possibility of redemption. After much debate, they reached a decision on the exact day that marked 1 year of the king's transformation. They would gather at midnight and lift the mujam that bound him to his animal form. As the appointed hour drew near, the Muja queen stood at the forefront of the assembly, her eyes filled with determination as she prepared to fulfill her promise to the king on one condition: he was never to tell anyone of this experience or who the Muja queen was. The day he would reveal this information would be his last day as a human. She once again spoke to the Agama, and with a shimmering light the king was enveloped and stood once more among his people as his human form was restored. To the surprise of all, he found himself unable to speak, his voice stolen by the lingering effects of his ordeal. Undeterred, the king stepped forward, his eyes pleading for understanding as he saw the counsel of the Muja council. With a heavy heart, the Muja queen spoke, her voice firm yet tinged with compassion as she laid out the terms of his redemption. She told him he had been given another chance. With an unwavering gaze she reinforced the fact that he would have a year to prove that he had truly changed, and failing to do so would transform him into a goat for all eternity. He was advised to use his new wisdom to govern the land. With a solemn nod, the king accepted the Muja queen's decree, vowing to mend his ways and govern the kingdom with kindness and compassion. And true to his word, he set about the task of transformation, working tirelessly to right the wrongs of his past and build a brighter future for all who called his kingdom home. As the years passed, the king's action spoke louder than words, as he showed humility, kindness and fairness in all his dealings. And when that appointed day arrived, the Muja queen stood once more before the council, her heart filled with hope as she announced that the king had proven himself worthy of his throne. With cheers of joy and relief, the people welcomed their reformed ruler back to the throne, his reign marked by a newfound sense of justice and compassion. All his chiefs were changed and all their loot used to feed, clothe and transform the kingdom. And as the years passed, the kingdom flourished under his wise and benevolent rule, a testament to the power of transformation through intervention to help the human spirit. The king loved and cherished his children, becoming a father they never imagined. He celebrated his daughters and walked with them to the stream whenever he could. His wives rejoiced at their transformed and compassionate husband, who gave them access to his fortune. The people of the land could not believe how their king had become a compassionate ruler to them all. All the other kings traveled from their land to visit the king and to sign treaties with him. The end.